Mike Rowe, welcome to the Dad Edge, my friend.
I'm flattered to be invited, and I'm glad to be here, virtual though it may be.
And you and I were just we were just chatting before we hit record, and I was actually born in the city that you're living in, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah, man. You, Thomas Wolfe, right? You can never go home again, but you can always visit.
That's true. That is true. Hey, where I'd really like to start is I want to start with how you grew up and even the relationship with your dad, your mom, and just what that upbringing was like for you.
It was great. I hit the lottery, man. I didn't know it at the time, which of course most great lottery tickets require a certain level of ignorance at the moment when you hit it. I didn't know how lucky I was. I grew up with two parents who were still in love with each other. I got two younger brothers. We were raised in a little farmhouse on a hill in Baltimore County, and there was almost no one around us. We had about 60 or 70 acres of woods behind us that we had unlimited access to that no one could develop. The state owned it, but it was lowlands and thick forest and marsh, right? So no one was back there except my brothers and me. And so growing up, we had this weird kind of Huck Finn juxtaposition, geographically that, we didn't go on vacations. We didn't have any money or anything, but we had an amazing playground right next to our home. My mother was crazy for horses. So my dad and my granddad built a barn. We boarded horses for years. We didn't own them. We didn't own much of anything, come to think of, but we had access to a lot of cool stuff. The woods, all the wildlife in it, covered bridges, dirt roads, horses. Our house was heated primarily by wood stoves. So we had a giant wood pile. There were chores, and maybe most importantly, I had two dads. My grandfather and his wife lived right next door. And so we're up on this little hilltop in Baltimore. I'm pretty much under the impression that I'm Huck Finn living, in Colorado or something. Didn't even know till years later that we were only 3 or 4 miles from the city line. But we had this very unique, isolated place where we were free to roam and use our imaginations and forced really to entertain ourselves, which was great. Also, I know it's the dad edge, but this is really a grandfather conversation because my pop, he was the guy whose original home was in the way of the interstate, and he relocated to the top of this hill. He knew that the state would never be able to develop that woodland. He also knew that the power lines back there needed to be maintained. And so the state put in this private road that no one ever used except the state and us. And so my pop carved out this really special place where his daughter and his son-in-law were able to raise their three boys. And virtually every good thing that's happened to me along the way, I can walk back and assign some relevance to my childhood in that place on the Trumps Mill Road where I grew up.
Yeah, I'm just imagining what it was like growing up like that. I grew up similar but different. I
Mm.
remember there was one friend in particular that I'd always go over to his house. And it's actually fascinating that we're talking because my wife and I are celebrating 20 years of marriage, and we went on a trip last week, and we were talking about just, things about our childhood that we had never actually discussed. And
Yeah.
she was like, tell me something about your childhood that you never told me. I was like, actually, I was like, there was one friend of mine, he only lived about a mile from me, but his house backed up to like just woods, endless woods. And we would go back there like for hours. Like we would
Yeah.
go back there and we'd come back when it was dark.
Yeah.
She was like, "Well, what was back there?" I was like, "I honestly have no clue." And so like I literally went on my phone on Google Maps, and I found the street that he lived on, and I was like, I just want to see from a bird's eye view of what's back there. And it backed up to this park, but at the time it's a park now, but it was crazy underdeveloped back then. And we had just a blast back there. Like we just explored, and we actually found these old rope swings, tire swings back there.
Oh
We
yeah,
played on those. Like no, I don't even know if anybody even knew they were back there.
it's
But
treasure.
yeah, it was a treasure, and it was just such fond memories. But yeah, I'd really love to know just specifically what's maybe one or two memories, that just very specifically just stick out growing up like that.
God, I mean, with regard to the woods, there were many because it was a place of great imagination. It was a playground. So a lot of times my buddies and I would wander back there and truly just explore, just explore the place. It seemed boundless, as an 8 or a 10-year-old. It truly seemed limitless. There was no edge to it. And the tree houses we built were elaborate. And you say you went back there, all hours. We went back there for the weekend. My parents it was a different time, but literally on a Friday or a Saturday morning, I could say, I'll see you Monday, and pack a bag and go back into the woods and camp and explore. And later, of course, because we were boys and idiots, we took welding masks and our BB guns and had great battles. Ridiculous. But I'm not encouraging this, for God's sakes, but we had BB gun battles back in the woods. There was a stream, Larry, that ran through there called Stemmer's Run. And one day I remember following the stream with no clear idea at all of where it could possibly go once it left the woods. And of course it did. And it wandered underneath culverts, right? And it went underneath highways, and it went underneath bypasses. And the things you would find on the stream bed were endlessly mysterious and weird, from dead chickens to mannequins. Like all the flotsam and jetsam from the last flood would be deposited along the banks. And we would wander for hours and hours and suddenly find ourselves at the Golden Ring Mall, a place where I knew existed because I had been there, but only by highway. And then suddenly to find a place by following a stream, it was just, I mean, I hate to over romanticize it, but it was magical. It was
Yeah.
just it was like, Winnie the Pooh, right? He had the 100-acre wood. That's basically what this was. And so from an entertainment standpoint, it represented all of what was possible in the world of play and exploration for a young kid growing up in a place like Baltimore. But it also represented work. The woods was the place where we went to get the trees. The trees were the things we cut up every day and split. It's how we heated our home. And going back into the woods with my pop and my granddad on a cold winter morning with a thermos of coffee, the very first thermos of coffee my mom ever handed me. I was probably 10 or 11, but sipping coffee with those men, felling trees with my dad, who he and my grandfather, they looked at it like it was a game show, right? Like if you could drop a tree in the exact spot where you wanted it to land, then that was cause for a great celebration. Didn't matter too much back in the woods. You can only do so much damage. But, my pop used to do that in neighborhoods where you had to drop a 90-foot oak right directly on the sidewalk. 2 feet left, 2 feet right, you got a problem. So, watching them do that with levers and pulleys, that was another kind of magic for me. And that magic was always on display growing up, both back in the woods and thanks to the weird ingenuity of my granddad, which I should just mention, quick sidebar. He only went to the 7th grade, this guy. But by the time he was 30, he was an electrical contractor. And he had that chip, in the back of his head that would enable him to fix anything. A combustion engine, a chainsaw. You could take your watch apart, put it back together blindfolded, right? That was the real magician I grew up next to. So between my pop's innate ability to fix or repair or fabricate anything, and my dad's willingness to work as his apprentice, oftentimes back in this weird, mysterious, magical woods, I had a I had a front row seat to a lot of things that would inform everything from dirty jobs to, my own ideas about how to work and how to make money and how to function and how to be a man.
That's really cool, man. And your pops, was he your mom's dad?
He was. My
Yeah.
granddad he only had girls, and his last name was odd, Noble. Permission to engage in a shameless plug here on Zoom.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's his name there on a bottle of whiskey that we started making a couple of years ago. We sell Noble online. It's a fundraiser for the foundation that was ultimately created in his honor as well. So his name kind of died with him. He didn't have sons, he had girls, but he treated my dad like he was his son, and he certainly treated my brothers and I the same way. So, yeah, we had two dads growing up. Very, very, very fortunate.
I caught that when you said several minutes ago when you said son-in-law. And immediately I was just like, wow. I was like, if I heard that right, that's a pretty unique relationship for, a pops, as you call him, and your dad, which was his son-in-law, that they got along that well and did things like that growing up. That had to be really cool to see that.
Well, he was, again, you don't realize the cards you get really sometimes until you get down the road and look back, right? It's like so many of the key moments in your life feel kind of mundane when they're happening. It's not till you get some space and time and some years on you that you can look back and go, holy crap, that was instructive, And I didn't have any sense of what, an in-law relationship, what a normal one was. I didn't have any point of reference. We didn't have a lot of other people in our lives, really, So I had my granddad, Carl Noble, who just adored my dad and vice versa, which was weird because my grandmother, Thelma, she was not excited about my father marrying my mother. So they had some work to do to get over that whole dynamic. And my mother, geez, you write a book on her. She was her own unique force of nature and still is. She's 85 years old. She's written 3 best-selling books. The first one she published when she was 80. So there's a lot, I don't know how deep you want to go, but there's a lot of odd stuff to unpack in the family tree that is a wall of ivy on my particular, you know, genealogy, the hot mess that is my past.
That is unreal, man. It sounds like you mentioned early on in the show that you had a winning lottery ticket
Oh yeah.
for a family. And you also mentioned that when you have the winning lottery ticket, you don't really realize how fantastic it is until maybe you grow up a little bit and look at maybe other relationships or other childhoods or friends or whatever else. But what was it that made your family, besides what you shared already, which by the way is pretty darn cool, but what were some things that really stood out as far as that winning lottery ticket?
Oh, well, look, to be fair, I mean, I couldn't have wished for or gotten 2 better parents. But let me be clear, they were wonderful liars. They lied to my brothers and I in such terrific fashion that they kept us in a really interesting place. I feel bad for kids who grow up knowing they're wealthy, and I feel bad for kids who grow up knowing they're poor. In hindsight, we were a whole lot closer to poor than rich. But the trick, the great deceit that they pulled on us was creating a world where we felt privileged, even though by any traditional metric, by any macroeconomic indicator, we were not. But what they did was just diabolical. I've written a lot about this myself, trying to figure out their own parenting style. But they would, where a lot of kids might default into envy, they found a way to replace that with sympathy or even empathy. Like if I ask, my mother why we couldn't order out for pizza or Chinese food like all my friends did, my father would step in and say, Michael, look, the truth is, poor, Bobby's parents, and Steve's parents, they don't know how to cook, okay? And you shouldn't make fun of them because they can't cook. They don't even know what a home cooked meal is, all right? They have no choice. They have to rely on strangers bringing them food somebody else made. But look, it's not their fault, but that's just the way it is for them. Meanwhile, check
Yes.
out this amazing meatloaf casserole your mother has made, right? And we didn't know any better. But it was like this in everything. I remember sitting on the living room floor watching some sitcom on our little black and white TV, and a commercial came on for the amusement park at Ocean City, Maryland, right? And this looked like just the epitome of fun, roller coasters and tilt-a-whirls and all kinds of rides, and kids who looked like me sitting together strapped in having a great time. And my parents are sitting behind us on the couch as I'm watching this commercial during a break in the Orioles game, and I hear my mother say to my father, quietly, but just loud enough for me to hear, like, oh, John, isn't it a shame today, all these kids out there with just no way to amuse themselves other than to whatever this is? And, my dad right on cue was like, oh, yeah, Peg, it's a damn shame. Look at that kid. He looks like he's about to throw up all over his friends. Well, John, not everybody has a giant woods behind their home where they can entertain themselves. Yeah, you're right, Peg. It really is a shame. And like underneath all of it is just this, subtext of, oh, those poor bastards. Right.
Right.
But dude, it never stopped. I remember like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory,
Oh yeah.
big, big campaign. It was playing down at the Senator Theater. And my brothers and I, we would have loved to have gone to see that. But before we could even ask during the advertisement for it, my mom and dad engaged in this conversation about what a shame it is that kids can't read anymore. They just don't understand the simple beauty of sitting down with a book. They have to go sit in the dark with strangers to watch some other person's version of entertainment. I literally grew up feeling sorry for people who ordered out, who had to go to the theater to be entertained, who went to amusement parks, even our clothes. I had two giant cousins, Stephen and Gary, my mother's other sister, and all of our clothes were hand-me-downs. We didn't call them hand-me-downs. I still remember my parents talking about them as these incredible, like, broken in clothes. Isn't it a shame, Larry, that so many kids these days have to walk around in these awful new blue jeans that are all stiff and uncomfortable, where we get this constant supply of beautiful clothing, thoughtfully broken in by our cousins?
Thoughtfully broken. Oh my gosh, man.
That was it. I mean,
Yeah.
they were psychopaths. They completely fooled us into thinking that we were well off, training us to feel sorry for people who had it better than we did. And in between, there was nothing to do but pick up horse crap, split wood, and build tree forts back in a woods that wasn't even ours. It was great.
Oh my gosh. Every single person listening to this interview right now, every single dad needs to take a chapter out of that as a life lesson.
Welcome to it. It's cheap. Don't cost you nothing.
Man, that is pretty cool. I'm as I'm sitting here kind of speechless, I'm thinking about you as this little kid, growing up like that, and you probably didn't miss a beat, right? It was like, oh yeah, good point, right?
It all made perfect sense until it didn't. Now, of
Right.
course, they knew that at some point the jig would be up. It's a big world out there, and eventually you get out of the 6th grade, and now you're in middle school, and now you're coming in touch with all sorts of other things and all kinds of other people. But whatever, they they played the cards they got as long as they could, and it did lay a truly wonderful foundation. In fact, I don't even remember ever resenting it. I mean, the first time I think I remember feeling something like grudging respect for my parents' parenting abilities was right after I realized we had all, my brothers and I, had been victims of a very long con, but a fun one.
Yeah, no kidding, but a fun one. What was so you said you were the oldest of three, correct? You're the oldest of three? Yeah.
Still am.
So being, they we always, so we have four boys, you grew up with two younger brothers, but we all, we always call our oldest the young adult or the third parent because he's always like, we even have to kind of correct him. We're like, Ethan, you just leave the parenting to us, okay? Because he'll just like jump right in, and which
Yeah.
I think it's cool to want to be the leader, right? But growing up with two younger brothers, what uh what was that like for you? Did you feel compelled, to lead them, or maybe even be like maybe that third parent just watching their back, or what was that experience like for you?
It was manic. There were days when I absolutely felt like they're keepers. There
Yeah.
were other days when I absolutely felt like they were aliens. There were days when I felt jealous of them, protective of them, angry with them. We really, looking back, I don't think I can really put it in much of a playbook, because my brothers and I are very different. We obviously we have some things in common, but today, if you put us in a room, you'd be seriously curious about how three individuals could have come from these same two parents. And our personalities, I think, were always distinct. So I loved that. I can't speak for them, but I'm pretty sure they did as well. Um, but we all went through our different phases at different times. My middle brother was super, super shy and introspective. My younger brother was an insane animal lover and boundlessly curious. I was a weird kid. I had a stutter, a stammer anyway, for a lot of my youth, and I didn't. I was not. I was not gregarious. I didn't like. I was curious, but I didn't. But not about people. My mother still tells the story. That when the doorbell used to ring or somebody knocked, I dove under the table. Like, the idea of just meeting somebody for the first time was not pleasant for me. You know, I liked the woods. But you know what? The thing is, I'm not sure what to glean from it, Larry, if anything, because people do change, and and kids change, and dads change, and parents change. At least in my experience, the good ones do, right? You need some rigidity. You need certainty so the people around you can at least form some cogent level of expectations. But too rigid, too certain, you don't evolve, right? I mean, just evolving in fatherhood, evolving in being a husband, evolving in being a boyfriend, evolving in being a kid. I mean, I guess maybe what I'm saying is I'm a little suspicious of anything that feels or sounds too pat, right? There are certain things, few things, I think, that you can really hang your hat on today in terms of advice, but not much, you know, not much. And I'm doubly suspicious of the revisionist kind of history that I know I'm guilty of when I look back and try and connect things, you know, through the lens of time. I'm just not really sure if I'm full of crap or not when I do that. It feels sometimes like I am, and sometimes like, well, that was just a memory I have. That's what was happening when I was 11. We were all in a different place.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I really wanted to have you on and talk about is I think there have been, traditional roles when it's come to parenting, and I think there's been now a mess of non-traditional roles. Um, if you, some of the things that I just I shake my head at, and I'm just like, man, this is this whole thing is kind of going in a direction that I'm not really on board with in some cases. Some cases I am, in some cases I'm not. But
You're talking about
couple,
headlines?
yeah, of course, headlines and just things going on in the world. And sometimes I'm just sitting here wondering, like, what happened to some of the traditional things that we used to hang our hat on as families and as roles. But what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, I think it's very popular right now to upend taboos. I think it's very fashionable right now to to unpack and um, distance ourselves from things that feel fundamental and traditional. And look, I think there probably are some things that might be worth decoupling from or getting some distance from, but you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Actually, you can. You just shouldn't. You know, I run a scholarship program today. Um, there's a foundation called Microworks that evolved out of dirty jobs, and it's been around for about 15 years. And we award work ethic scholarships to kids who don't want to pursue a 4-year degree, but would be more comfortable learning a skill. Plumbers, steam fitters, pipe fitters, guys like my granddad, electricians. We have a huge looming shortage of electricians coming up. But really, all of the skilled trades have been on the ropes for a long time. There are over 9.5 million open positions right now that don't require a 4-year degree. So my foundation awards what I call work ethic scholarships because I want to at least do something to encourage a conversation around work ethic and maybe challenge some people. Work ethic is one of those things that has become weirdly controversial today. When you talk about the importance of work ethic, what a lot of people hear is I don't know, some kind of dog whistle, some sort of negative thing, you know. Some like if I talk about the importance of working hard, many people will hear that as me uh, running cover or providing cover for greedy, rapacious capitalists who are trying to hire people. Right? It's strange, but if you're talking about traditional components of things that will help you be a more successful worker over the course of your career, I'm sorry, I still believe work ethic is somewhere near the top of the list, along with delayed gratification and a decent attitude and personal responsibility and the willingness to show up early and stay late and volunteer for every crappy task there is. All of those things they're not terribly popular right now,
Right.
but they're terribly important, you know. So yeah, I find myself from time to time probably sounding like the unpersuasive neighbor on the porch shaking his fist at the sky yelling at the kids to get off the lawn or get a job or some such thing. I don't want to be that. I don't want to be unpersuasive, but I do believe that those qualities are weirdly under assault today. And part of what I try and do with my foundation is push back against that and make a more persuasive case for 9.5 million good jobs that are sitting there wide open, offering wonderful opportunities to anybody who would have them.
Yeah, work ethic is something. So you and I, we grew up similar but different. We didn't have any means growing up, and but I really didn't feel like I was. I mean, I felt the stress of it, but I didn't really feel like I was missing out on a ton. It just was what it was. But with this day and age, what I've noticed, along with my boys and the temptations that they have, the things that are at their fingertips, like their cell phone, the window to the world, right? It's the epitome of non-delayed gratification. Like you can see, research, do anything you want with a click of a button. And it's funny, my boys always tell us, they're like, gosh, because we make them work for everything. We there's no golden tickets in our family. And our boys will tell us they appreciate, now that we have two older ones, we have a 17 and a 15-year-old, and we have a 9 and a 7-year-old. But the 17 and 15-year-old, we recently had conversations with them where they're like, I love it and I hate it. The fact that you guys make us work as hard as we do.
Sure.
And I was like, and then they'll kind of push back on us too. They're like, gosh, you guys are all so old school. Like such and such parents don't do this. And we're like, hey, be careful what you say because we take it as a compliment.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So, but what advice do you have for parents of our generation to raise kids with that work ethic? I mean, I've got opinions of my own, but I would love to hear yours.
Well, just take them with a grain of salt. Full
Yeah.
disclosure, I don't have any kids,
Right.
right? And my own feeling about advice is that I kind of hinted at this earlier, but I'll just say it plainly now as clearly as I can. I can't think of a single thing that's caused more problems in our country and more confusion in many millions of households than the assumption that conventional wisdom is really and truly a thing, and that cookie cutter advice, bromides, platitudes, these things that wind up hanging on walls in conference room, successories, the ones I'm talking about, some team of people in some sort of kayak all rowing at the same time, and underneath it says teamwork, exclamation point, or persistence, or determination, right? It's like, great, all terrific qualities. But, I saw one the other day that said, stay the course. And it's like, just a guy in a sailboat out there in the middle of nowhere, right? Staying the course only makes sense if you're headed in the right direction, right? It's like, follow your passion. We hear it all the time. I know so many dads who tell their kids, so many grandparents, so many guidance counselors and teachers and scoutmasters and preachers and so many well-intended people have told an entire generation of kids, look, if you want to be happy, you need to identify the source of your passion. And then once you've done that, then you can lay out a plan on how to get the skills you need to get to that place where your passion will allow you to be content and to be happy, in your work. And I'm just so suspicious of that, Larry. Everybody I met on Dirty Jobs, and I met 350 people over 20 years of filming that show, doing things that at a glance, most of us would look at and go, oh God, no, thank you. Not for me. Better you than me. But almost universally, those people were super passionate about their jobs, but they weren't passionate from the jump, right? They weren't kids who sat down and said, when I grow up, I'm going to be a septic tank technician, or I'm going to own a fleet of garbage trucks, or I'm going to be a skull cleaner, or a welder, or any number of other things. These people, they followed opportunity, and then they found a way to be passionate about the job at hand, and then they found a way to love it. So it's almost, so much of what we tell our kids today is backwards, or it's a shortcut. You don't get to be passionate about your first job unless you're awfully lucky, or unless you're passionate about everything, in which case you've already won the lottery. That's the great secret to life, at least when it comes to vocational work, getting paid to earn a living. One of the great secrets, and one of the bits of advice I'm not stingy with, is to say that job satisfaction, it's not really about the job. It's about the jobber, right? And if that weren't the case, well, then every movie star and TV star I know would be happy, well balanced, and well adjusted. But they're not. And 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 every garbage man I know would be miserable, walking around like they, won some vocational consolation prize, but they're not, right? So this idea that our happiness is going to be a reflection of our ability to correctly identify our passion is madness. It's kind of like we do the same thing with soulmates, right? Want to be happy in your marriage? Well, here's what you do. You get out there in the world and you find your soulmate. She's out there, fellas. You can find her. Just keep looking. Just keep looking. Well, what is that? I mean, do you really suspect there's only one person in the world who's capable of being a wonderful partner and a loving companion and a loyal and trusted spouse? Of course not. There are many, right? But if you go looking for a spouse with the idea that there's only one who can check all the boxes, you're going to have a tough time. And if you go out into the world looking for a job that's going to mirror your passions just perfectly, well, you're going to spend your life searching for that thing. You're going to wind up being one of the people who auditioned for American Idol and not only didn't win, but learned for the very first time at 22 years of age on national television that you can't sing. It's a look, here's the succinct version. Just because you love something doesn't mean you can't suck at it. And just because you're not really into something doesn't mean you might not have a great facility for it. You might be great at it. And once you figure what that is, you might find a way to be passionate about it and ultimately to love it. That was a big lesson on Dirty Jobs. And it was a big lesson my granddad taught me. That guy who could build or fix anything, that guy who built our house without a blueprint, I was sure I was going to follow in his footsteps. I was sure I was going to be able to do the thing he did because I loved it so much. I just loved so much being in my dad and my granddad's presence and watching these men, these manly men, fix or repair anything. And, when I was 16, I realized the handy gene is recessive. Their talents, they weren't my talents. They didn't come easily to me. And it was my pop who said, look, Mike, you can be a tradesman if you want to. Just get a different toolbox. And that's what I've spent my life doing, trying to think about work as a tradesperson and to always augment my toolbox as best I can. And I guess that's a really long way of saying I don't know what to tell dads exactly, because I don't know what their kids need to hear at any moment in time. To your earlier point, the advice I needed to hear when I was 10 was very different than when I was 15 and 12 and 17. I needed to hear different things, and I needed to hear those things from different people. And so when I look around today and I see all of the approved advice, the pat advice, the bromides, the tropes, things like, hey, if you don't go to college, you're probably going to wind up turning a wrench and being screwed for the rest of your life. That's actual advice that's out there today. I think it's bad advice, but not for everyone. Some people might need to hear that. I just don't know who they are or if they're listening. So that's why I tend to ramble and be nonspecific when you ask questions like that.
Personally, I think the advice that you just gave was not only appropriate for men who are raising sons and daughters, but it was 100% appropriate for the men. I'll give you an example. So I'll be 48 in a month. And, I've been doing a lot of self-reflection, and I do this thing around this time every single year, which is I basically, a lot of people plan their year at the beginning of the year. And I do that too, but I also do a mid-year plan of where am I going to be this time next summer. And I actually was on vacation with my wife. We did a one-on-one trip for our 20-year anniversary. This was just last week. And we both allowed ourselves just some space, as we were kind of like just chilling on the beach, just to read or write or do whatever. And I started going through that process. And here's the fascinating thing about what you just said, because it really hit me, and this is like fresh off my mind and off my heart, is that I remember before doing this work, I was in a really lucrative career in medical device sales before going full-time with Dad Edge years ago. And I remember if I could only go full time with Dad Edge, then I'd be happy. Then I'd have work life balance. Then I could do this. Then I could do that. It was always, if I do this, I could then do X, Y, and Z. And the funny thing is I never really got myself out of quite that habit. And it wasn't until I just went on this trip that I caught myself. And I was writing down the things that I want to do by next year. And I was like, and if I can do this, this will allow me to be more fulfilled and I'll have more time with my kids. And I literally reread that as I wrote it. And I was like, well, why don't I just be fulfilled and happy with my kids now? Like, why in God's name do I need to do all this stuff in order to do that? Why can't I just be fulfilled now? So I completely erased everything that I wrote. And I was like, I'm going to live my life fulfilled. I'm going to live my life with balance. I'm going to live my life enjoying my family while also doing some work. And I don't know what it was about flipping that switch, because so many of us are programmed. If 1 + 2 equals this, then I'll have it when I get the 1 and the 2, and then I'll be fulfilled.
It's
Versus like,
conditional. That's
right,
right.
it's always conditional. Versus like, well, wait a second. What if I just decide that I can be fulfilled? What if I just decide that I'm going to enjoy these things that I'm wanting to enjoy for some reason in the future? Why don't I just enjoy them now? And I rewrote the entire thing, and I wrote it
That's
in
great.
that way.
You know, I've got mixed feelings about the self-help industry, precisely because if you're going to dispense advice, you're going to write a book, you're going to put it between two covers, then you're going to make videos, then you're going to make money, and then you're going to be a guy who's out there telling people, here's the path or a path. That's as useful as it is scary to me. But having said that, I've been to a lot of them because I am fundamentally curious. I went through the EST thing. I went through the forum thing. I went through the Tony Robbins thing. I've kicked around. I've read most of those books, and I've taken some things from them. Not everything from any one source, not even close to it. But years ago, I did the VO for a Tony Robbins Date with Destiny or something like that. And I wound up getting invited down to Florida to sit through one of these things. And I saw some amazing things. I saw some things that I really liked. I saw some things that I didn't. But one of the things he did that stuck with me was very similar to what you just described. He said, look, make a list of things that you value, the things that are really important to you, and then arrange them in an order that you think is most reflective of your own priorities. And I had things on there like a meaningful relationship, security, financial freedom, and then some very specific things like own 2 homes, right? Like this, and then on the other side, he said, now make a list of the things that need to happen in order for the things you value to become real. In other words, if you really value security and the feeling of being financially set, or if you really value peak fitness, okay, tell me what you need to do to get there. And of course, when you give your brain a task like that, you'll get it. You'll get it done. And we spent hours. I spent hours really thinking about what I would need in order to feel financially secure. And some of the things I wrote were not just to own my home, but to have it completely paid for, to have zero debt, not low debt, zero debt, right? To be able to vacation 2 months a year, to be able to set my own schedule, right? I mean, I really went through and thought about it. And when I was done, you realize that the things you value most are the exact things you've made it virtually impossible to achieve. And nobody has done that to you but you. So to feel like a successful dad, what do you need to do, right? What has to happen to your kids in order for you to feel like you did your job? To be a successful husband, what has to happen between you and your wife to reflect that? How many vacations? How many date nights? How much exactly? And when you ask yourself those questions, you'll come up with answers. The real question, I think, is, are those really good questions?
Right. Right.
Right? It's, I'm not saying you shouldn't have any metric at all, because what's, a goal without some sort of condition is just a dream. Um, but we get to decide just how hard the trek is going to be. And that brings me back to something I wanted to say. You made an earlier comment about comfort and discomfort, and your kids love the work ethic that you espouse, but they also hate you for doing it. And how do you balance that? There's a terrific book out there right now. I just finished it, and I know your listeners would like it. It's called The Comfort Crisis.
Mm.
And you might want to talk to the author. His name is Michael Easter. And this guy wrote, still does, extensively for like Men's Health and outdoor magazines and things like that. But he was feeling really disconnected from the fundamental things in his own life. So he went on a 33-day caribou hunt deep in the Arctic with a guy named Donnie Vincent, who's lived his whole life off the grid. And what happens to Michael up there in terms of nutrition and fitness and pain and fear and boredom and self-reliance and all of these things? He tells you the story of his trip, but then he spends a lot of time looking at the benefits of being uncomfortable in these very specific ways. And then another thing you said earlier, you held up your cell phone and you talked about the incredible access that we have. Like, it's impossible to be bored now, Larry. We can't handle it. If we're not doing anything for 10 seconds, we're reaching for the nearest screen. Here's mine right here. I got it super handy. And to your point, with an internet connection, I can access 99% of all the known information in the world, right? 2 days ago, I just watched a lecture over at MIT for free. The same thing kids are paying tens of thousands of dollars for. I can watch it for free. I can also watch porn. I can also watch myself on old episodes of Dirty Jobs. I can also get the instructions on how to build a stable, right? Like my pop and my granddad did without those instructions. It's all there. So becoming comfortable with boredom, becoming comfortable with discomfort, I don't know how to articulate it, but that's what I would say to the dads who listen to your podcast. When I got off the phone with Michael, because I had him on my podcast, and he's a great interview. I walk 8 miles a day, right? I wake up early. I walk as fast as I can. I'm the jackass you've seen out there, knees pumping, elbows all over the place. I'm on a cell phone. I'm talking to my office where I'm listening to a podcast. But for 2 hours, I'm walking 8 miles at about 4 miles an hour. And Michael said, well, why are you doing that? I mean, you should get a Go Ruck pack and put a 45-pound plate in it. That'll slow you down a bit. It'll hurt a lot more. Your shoulders are going to complain for a while, but you're going to burn twice as many calories in half the time. You're going to hate every step. And he was right. But that's what I've been doing for the last 3 weeks. I haven't taken a hot shower in 3 months. All my showers are cold now. It's unpleasant. It's uncomfortable. But 2 minutes after I'm out, I feel 1,000% better. So, it's not enough to suck it up. It's not enough to tell your kids, look, you have to be okay being uncomfortable. As dads, I would say, and again, what do I know? I'm way out of my lane here. But since you asked, I would say the challenge isn't to do something to inspire your kids to be okay with being uncomfortable. The challenge is to do something to inspire them to figure out a way to love it. You do that, you're going to be raising CEOs and presidents all day long.
Well, you call yourself unqualified, but I think that that's pretty darn accurate.
Yeah.
I really do, because I think when when you're somebody who perhaps isn't in the situation, you can view it just quite a bit differently, which that's what I've loved about your message. And you're 100% right. And I think if anybody needs to hear that, it's not necessarily the generation that we're raising, it's the generation that is raising this
Oh, dude.
this next
Now
generation.
that's what the kids would call a truth bomb, you
Mhm.
know, and it took me a while to see this too, because with my sweat pledge and my work ethic scholarships, I spend a lot of time out there trying not to sound like a douchebag. You know, I don't want, nobody wants a lecture. Nobody wants a sermon unless it's a Sunday morning, right? People do want advice, but they don't want it at the end of a wagging finger. So it's just really, really difficult to to walk that line. I lost my train of thought. What was the last thing you just said? I had a good one.
No, I think it's not just necessarily the generation that we're raising that needs that advice. It's
That's it.
us. It's the men who are raising this generation that needs the advice you just gave.
So here's the thing I said on where was I? I might have been, it was either CNN or Fox. I've been doing all the normal shows, but somebody said, look, what do you say to the snowflakes? What do we say to the safe space culture? What do you say to these men and women now who are so fragile that they can't even tolerate a measure of free speech on a campus, a place where free speech was the original thing? Like, what do you say to that generation of snowflakes? And I said, historically, I would try and say something to get them to think differently, but I don't think I can do it anymore. I'm 60 years old. I don't think they're buying it from me. So what I would say instead is, we are the clouds from which the snowflakes fell. We did this. Every single thing that we've done that has resulted in that element, in whatever this, what is it, Generation Z, I guess it is. Every single thing has been an appeasement. Every single thing, every single well-intended thing has been an effort to mollify or provide a level of comfort. That's why that book is important to me, because you your capacity to be uncomfortable is everything. And that's what it feels like we've robbed. That's what we've taken from kids. We've just made it virtually impossible for them to be uncomfortable. And as a result, we've, in many cases, I think, created the exact opposite of what we hope to have: a resilient, skeptical, curious, open minded, good natured soul. What we get are fragile, vindictive, accusatory, precious, and delicate people. And it's crazy to blame them for that, because those things have to be taught. You're not, I don't know of anybody who was born with work ethic. I don't know of anybody who was born with delayed gratification or a decent attitude. You tell me your kids, your 2-year old, when he was 2, is sitting there, and the 4-year old's next to him, and the 4-year-old wants the thing the 2-year-old has. Like, there's not a negotiation. There's not, we don't dive into the deep end of lake empathy. We take it. We take that fire truck, and maybe just for good measure, we bash him over the head with it, just to let him know that, hey, I'm 4 and you're 2, and this is the way it happens. So then dad has to come in, and we have to have a teachable moment. We have to correct it, right? So we're just, the fault in our stars is real. And, you know, I, even though I don't have any experience doing it, it seems to me, what I know of my dad and my granddad, they were good at correcting it. There were no trophies for participating. There was no sympathy. Oh, you have blisters, so you don't want to split the wood because you have the blisters. Okay, well, we'll just sit in the cold tonight. The blister is the thing that'll pop, and then it'll be a callus, and then you won't have them anymore, and so forth and so on. So somewhere underneath all of this, I think you're just going to find good dads who understand the importance of being uncomfortable.
Mhm. And I think if we're raising, so I see this, I coach a lot of my kids' teams, and we've got the two older ones, so we've had a little bit of practice, and now I'm coaching my 7-year-old's baseball team right now, and it's kind of fascinating because I'm like the older guy, they got a bunch of dads in their 30s and stuff like that, and what I've noticed is a lot of these parents are terrified to see their kids get uncomfortable. They're terrified to see their kids fail, strike out, not catch the ball, and or get hurt.
Sure.
It's like, hey, if you've played baseball, you've gotten hit in the chest with a ball, or you've gotten hit in the head, stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not signing off on you should be tossing, bean balls at these kids, but I see a lot of these parents like freak out. And I see a lot of these parents like they just want to run with this golden parachute or this soft, cozy blanket of comfort. And yeah, I even think about the way that you and I grew up, where there were no cell phones. There was
Mm.
no Life 360. You came home when it was dark and it was dinner. And if not, there was hell to pay if you didn't. But there was a lot of leeway for failure, getting hit with a BB gun if you didn't have your welder mask on. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Consequences.
Consequences. And it's very hard, I think, for this generation of parents to allow that space. Like we're seeing just an an obscene amount of parents that are just helicopters which I think that's a loving thing to do, but I also think it's a very dangerous thing to do.
Oh, look, what's the oldest expression, right? The road to hell is paved with what? Good intentions.
Right. Good intentions.
So, look, the unintended consequences of elevating a thing beyond its rational place in the chronology of common sense is, I think, what you're talking about. Most recently, in the wake of COVID, the lockdowns, and so many conversations that have been happening nationally, we see the rise of safetyism, right? I'm just going to put an ism on it because it's not safety. Safety is a state of mind that is with logical, sensible people all of the time. Safetyism is the thing that goes at the very, very top of the list. And what happens to a man, a family, a community, a state, a nation, a culture, or a species who values safety above all things, right? I mean, it's a question that I ask a lot because I did a special for Discovery years ago called Safety Third, which continues to raise eyebrows today. Maybe there's some relevance in it. The short version is my crew and I on Dirty Jobs back in 2003, 20 years ago. I can't believe it's been 20 years. But the first season of that show, we worked in a few dozen of the most dangerous places on the planet. I mean, crazy dangerous. Crucibles pouring liquid iron all around us, deep down in anthracite coal mines and bituminous mines, and fishing for crab on the Bering Sea. I mean, it's crazy environments, and we were scared. We were worried because we were doing a show that really hadn't been done before, and we were shooting in a really risky way, but none of us got hurt. And everywhere we went, we sat through these mandatory safety meetings. And I remember seeing safety first banners everywhere we went, and it worked. Like for that first season, we were paying attention. We were super mindful that our surroundings were hazardous. And if it was a lockout tagout procedure or a confined space drill, we were present and focused. Second season, still focused, but by this point, we'd been through 50 or 60 of these mandatory briefings. Safety first, everywhere we went. Safety first. That was the bromide. Season 3, the wheels came off the bus. Everybody in my crew got hurt. Thankfully, nothing too serious, but concussions, stitches. I broke 2 fingers, cracked a rib, singed my eyebrows off with a blast furnace, smashed a toe. Cameraman, everybody got hurt. And it really bothered me, Larry, because it just felt like what had changed. And I couldn't identify any one thing but for the fact that in the last safety briefing, underneath the big banner that said safety first, half my crew was asleep. And the guy conducting the briefing sounded an awful lot like the teacher in Charlie Brown, right?
Okay. I thought you were going to say
Wah, wah,
Ferris
wah.
Bueller, but
Same thing, right?
yeah.
Ben Stein, Bueller, Bueller.
Yeah.
That's it, right? So suddenly, like with a thunderclap, it hit me. My God, we've been told from the very beginning, just like many thousands of other employees, that the company cares about nothing more than our personal safety, which of course is a lie. United Airlines cares deeply about safety, but they don't exist for the purpose of getting us safely from point A to point B. They exist for the purpose of making money, employing people, and conveyance, right? I mean, it's of course you want to be safe. But why would we put it first? What weird thing might happen to an employee if he or she suddenly came to believe that the employer actually cared more about their well-being than they did? Would that not foster some level of complacency? Would that not have some great unintended consequence? Long story short, I did a lot of research into it, found some papers on homeostatic risk that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that once a person starts to believe that someone else cares more about their safety than they do, they're in danger. So one of the things on my sweat pledge, number 6, is very clear. Just because I'm in compliance doesn't mean I'm out of danger. Safety third. It's just a way of forcing people to look at whatever the risk is through some lens of personal responsibility. And I've been on this kick for 2 decades, but man, oh man, it's mainly a vocational rant, but when our country shut down and when I saw my neighbors and our elected officials, when I saw people like Andrew Cuomo, who I can still quote, I'll never forget it because he looked square at the lens like he was talking to me. And he had been asked, look, do you think we're overreaching here with the restrictions and the lockdowns? His exact words were, no measure, no matter how draconian, can be deemed excessive if it saves a single life. And I thought, holy hell, that's where we are. That's where we are. And it's not that he's a politician. Lots of politicians will say whatever they have to say to stay in power. But the number of regular citizens who believed that a year or two ago and who probably still believe it today, that alarms me. The number of dads who believe that the safety is the single most important thing in raising a kid. I don't know what kind of kid you're going to raise. It's a delicate thing to talk about because I know I sound like I'm fostering a level of irresponsibility, but all I'm really saying is that putting safety first or third is ridiculous. Safety always makes sense, but to abdicate your own role in your own well-being is to usher in the level of calamity that we experienced in the 3rd season of Dirty Jobs.
Wow, man. This has been very eye-opening. And I have really loved the nuggets and the advice and even the learnings from your own childhood, from your pops and from your dad. And this has been a very real and memorable interview. Just for me personally, this has just been awesome.
Well,
Uh,
likewise.
well, thank you. I want to give you some time here to talk about things that are coming in the future for you, or even just your scholarship program for the trades out there. Just anything that you would want the audience to know, or just ways to connect with you or to support what you're doing?
Well, sure. In no particular order, although I think this is probably the most important thing. If the dads or moms or whoever is listening, if you got a kid in your life who's trying to figure out what to do, you know, uh, there are a lot of choices, and a 4-year degree is a fine path for a lot of people. But our work ethic scholarship program is real. We've been at it now for 15 years. We'll be 16 on Labor Day. We give away $1 million every 6 months in work ethic scholarships. And if you want to explore that, the money's there. We raise plenty, and I give it away as judiciously as I can. There are some hoops to jump through. But if you know somebody who wants to either hit the reset button or explore a career in the trades, you can apply for a work ethic scholarship. We'll be doing them again later this summer, August and September, over at microworks.org. Aside from that, that's the sun in my solar system. Everything that revolves around it, honestly, is an attempt to keep the lights on. I got a line of whiskey named after my pop, Carl Noble. It's delicious. If you live in a state, I can ship some to you. Well, go to Noble Spirits and I'll do it. Proceeds benefit the foundation. I do a lot of speaking these days. I don't know if anybody cares, but once a month or twice, I find myself in front of a few thousand people making sounds, and that's fun. I got some books out there if you're into it. I got a podcast called The Way I Heard It, which has been a lot of fun, and you can listen to that wherever people listen to podcasts. I think maybe, for me, since we talked earlier about, the willingness to pivot and the ability to evolve, what I'm seeing in my business, Larry, is just crazy. The cable broadcasting world is so noisy. There's so many people with shows. I don't even know what to watch. It's just endless. I can't imagine what it's like to be a dad with 4 kids and to sit down and go, what do you guys want to watch?
Oh,
And all of a sudden, just the miasma, the hot mess of possibilities that you must be bombarded with, and the streaming options and the networks and this and that. I'm getting out of that. I've been so lucky to have 4 or 5 shows on Discovery for the last 20 years, but moving forward, I'm going to take the basic model, the Dirty Jobs model, and I'm going to find a couple of sponsors who I like, and I'm going to shorten it, and I'm going to do it on YouTube or Rumble or Fumble or Bumble or whatever the next thing is, right? And I'm just going to try and stay in my lane and do a show that continues to honor my pop and my dad and keep the foundation front and center. Try and stay in on the joke. Try not to follow my passion, but always bring it with me. Try not to get my own way, and play the cards I've got, which I still believe was a pretty good deal.
I agree with you. It's really interesting that you talk about what's on TV. So you were probably a fly on the wall in our house last night. So my wife and I were sitting around, and we had my 2 older boys are away at one's at band camp and the other one's at football camp right now. And so we had the 2 littles with us, the 7 and 9-year-old. And my wife was like, "What do you want to watch?" And I was like, "You know what? Nothing. I don't want to watch a thing." And she's like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah." I was like, we got home the other night, and I sat down and I was like, I don't even know what 90% of these shows are. Like, not a freaking clue. Like, I literally I was going through the guide, and I'm like, I don't know 90% of the things here. 10% I've seen, and the mere titles of most of these things that I wouldn't watch anyway. And I literally, like, I turned it on, and I look over my 9-year-old. I was like, "You want to do some Legos?" He was like, "Yeah." I was like, "There's no TV stayed off." I was like, "Man," I was just like, there's no, yeah, I sound like my grandpa, but I was he's like,
Dude, you just so completely buried the lead on your own podcast. That's the advice. That's it right there.
yeah.
The The screens are there from time to time, and we'll use them as prudently or as imprudently as we choose. But in the end, man, whether it's Lincoln Logs or Lego or a woods out back or a tree fort or a thing, I just don't know what could possibly be better advice. I don't know how it could ever be wrong to choose to sit down and fabricate a thing with your kid. I
Your
I
son.
think the dividends of doing that will pay off in ways that you probably won't even be around to see, by the time the dust settles. That's the wet work. That's the foundation that you put in. That kid's never going to remember the night we sat down together and made some popcorn and watched, season 5, episode 3 of Breaking Bad. They'll remember the tree fort. They'll remember the Lego thing.
I 100% agree.
Hey, do you
100%.
worry? Do you worry that what's happening on your own TV and in your own streaming world is happening here in this place I call Podcast Landia, where all of a sudden 3 million people have a podcast, and the ones that are decent, right? The ones that matter are like, the top 2 or 300, and like getting in there and staying in there. Like, do you worry? I mean, look, forgive me if I'm out of my lane, but what I'm leading up to is I think you're an interesting cat who obviously had an interesting career, pivoted like crazy. Come on my podcast and tell me the whole story, because I find it really, really refreshing and interesting to hear from a dad with 4 kids who's really actively engaged in trying to create what sounds like a repository of wisdom for people similarly afflicted.
I 100%. First of all, I'd love to come on the podcast. My story is definitely unique and kind of crazy. So my biological father, my mom and dad got divorced when I was like 9 months old. He left, but then or they split up, and it was a bad breakup. But then I ran into him by accident when I was 12. Had never had any recollection of him or knowing him or anything. Ran into him when I was 12. And then we had about a 6-month relationship, and we parted ways again. And then 17 years ago, I'm sitting in a Starbucks here in St. Louis I had a business meeting, and I look up, and who came walking in for his morning coffee, my dad.
No
And
kidding.
yeah, and we've had a good relationship ever since. I've got 2 younger half brothers. But my childhood, it was a revolving door of, men my mom dated or married. She was married 3 times, and it was it was crazy. I'm not gonna lie. But doing the work that I do now, I wanted to do fatherhood and being a good husband very well. And I had a laundry list of things of what not to do, but I had no idea what good looked like. So I literally started this as therapy, as a hobby. And but that's that is the story behind the podcast. I've been doing this since 2015 now. But to answer your question about the podcasting thing, here's a fascinating thing about similar subject that you're talking about here. Our podcast it does very well. It's the number one dad podcast for the past 4 years. We get tons of downloads, lots of traffic, all that good stuff. But here's the fascinating thing. So we have a decent YouTube channel, but I would say out of all of our channels, YouTube is most opportunity for growth. And my son was on YouTube the other night, and he's like, "Dad, check this out." He's like, "There's a guy." And Mike, I'm not kidding. Like, I literally scratched my head. I was like, "Please tell me you're kidding. Like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life." He's like, "Dad, there's a guy on YouTube. He's got a channel with 7 million subscribers, and each of his videos have millions of views." And I was like, "Well, what's the topic?" He's like, "It's him with a microphone right here, and he eats for an hour." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, what?" And he literally just eats like fried foods or something crunchy so people can hear him chewing. And I'm like, are you kidding me right now? Like, we're trying to change the face of like fatherhood out there. And this is what people subscribe to. What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, but it's like the sign at Disney World, right? You must be this tall to get on the ride.
Yeah.
And you are. And so what that means is that back to the cell phone, back to the smartphone, it's just a tool. It's like a gun in the cabinet. And if you pull it out, you are now capable of committing great mischief or becoming a true hero. How are you going to use it?
Mhm.
How are you going to use that smartphone? How are you going to use your space? What are you going to do with your 15 minutes of influence and fame? Are you going to mic yourself up and chew and swallow? Well, look, I guess that's a pretty big target and we can have some fun with that dude, but he's monetizing eating. He's making a fortune. So you kind of have to just look at all of it and realize the sublime and the ridiculous, they're not really opposites. They're two sides of the same coin. And it's difficult to make sense of a world I think this is probably a good place to land the plane because we started by talking about the manic nature of growing up in the woods, the schizophrenic nature of trying to raise your kids. You think you got it figured out with one, but then another one comes along and just pisses all over your playbook. Like, how do you like me now? What are you going to do with your wisdom now? It's just simply NA. Does not apply for this one. Maybe it'll apply for the next one. Who knows? So, I think it's terrific what you're doing, and I think it's interesting why you're doing it. And I'm not going to hijack the interview, but I got 1,000 questions. So come on the way I heard it, and spend an hour, and let me see if I can figure out what in the world makes you tick.
Oh, I would love to, man. This was anytime you want, I'd love to do it. But Mike, this has been awesome, man. I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation and your perspective. And this has been awesome. Top one of the top shows for me for sure. So thank you for coming on.
This is without question the best interview I've done all day. So I'm standing by. I'm at your disposal
Well, thank you. I
anytime.
take that as a compliment.
Awesome, man.
Gentlemen, so here's what we're going to do. You guys can head on over to thedadedge.com/431. You can connect with Mike there. We'll have all of his social media links, as well as Microworks, as well as his scholarship. We'll put a link in the whiskey for you as there as well, for those guys who love whiskey. But Mike, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for doing what you're doing, man. It's certainly better than putting a mic in your larynx and chewing and swallowing.
I don't think I'll ever get that desperate, man. It's just crazy, isn't it? So, but thank you so much for coming on, man. This was
Anytime,
awesome.
man. See you.
See you.